You are the devil. 8-year-old boy sentenced to life in prison after dismembering his mother. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Riverbrook, Missouri, was the kind of small town where everyone claimed to know everyone else's business. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Evelyn Thornton, 72 years old with silver hair always pinned in a neat bun, made her way toward Wilson's Cafe for her daily cup of tea. After 40 years as a social worker in this community, retirement had given her plenty of time to observe the town she'd dedicated her life to serving. The familiar bell above the cafe door jingled as she entered. Inside, the usual morning crowd huddled around tables, their voices unnaturally hushed. "Morning, Evelyn," called Martha, the waitress who'd been serving coffee there since Evelyn first arrived in town. "Your usual?" Evelyn nodded, noticing the newspaper clutched in everyone's hands. Something had happened. "What's got everyone whispering today?" she asked, settling onto her favorite stool by the counter. Martha's normally cheerful face clouded over. "You haven't heard? It's about Sarah Monroe and her little boy. Terrible situation." The name sparked recognition. Sarah Monroe. Evelyn remembered her as a quiet child with watchful eyes who never quite fit in at school. She'd lost track of her over the years, as sometimes happened with the hundreds of children whose files had crossed her desk. "What happened?" Evelyn asked, accepting the steaming cup Martha placed before her. "The boy, Elijah I think his name is, he's only 8 years old." Martha lowered her voice. "They're saying he hurt his mother. She's in the hospital and they've taken him into custody." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the soft clink of Evelyn's spoon against her teacup. "That can't be right," Evelyn said finally. "An 8-year-old boy?" "Sheriff Cooper was first on the scene," contributed Frank Wilson, the cafe owner, leaning across the counter. "Says the boy was just standing there, calm as can be, while his mother was unconscious on the floor." Something about this didn't sit right with Evelyn. In all her years of service, she'd learned that children's actions, however difficult to understand, always had reasons behind them. "What's going to happen to him?" she asked. "Heard Richard Hayes is taking the case personally," Frank replied. "You know how the district attorney feels about making examples." Evelyn did know. Richard Hayes had built his career on being tough on troublemakers, regardless of age or circumstance. As she left the Easy Cafe, Evelyn found herself walking not toward her small house on Maple Street, but in the direction of the county building where she'd spent 4 decades of her life. Her sensible shoes clicked against the sidewalk with newfound purpose. At the front desk sat a young woman Evelyn didn't recognize. "I'd like to see the file on Sarah Monroe and her son Elijah," Evelyn stated, using the authoritative tone that had opened many doors throughout her career. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but those files are confidential," the receptionist replied without looking up. "I'm Evelyn Thornton. I worked in this department for 40 years. "That's nice, but you're retired now, aren't you?" The young woman finally glanced up. "Rules are rules." As Evelyn turned to leave, a familiar voice called her name. Thomas Reynolds, now the department director, had been just a rookie when she first trained him. "Mrs. Thornton, what brings you back to these halls?" She turned, determination setting her jaw firm. "Thomas, I need to see the Monroe case." His welcoming smile faltered. "Ah, you've heard about that. I'm afraid I can't." "Thomas," Evelyn interrupted. "Something isn't right about this case. I can feel." "Duty, it's out of our hands now. The DA's office, that boy is 8 years old," Evelyn said, her voice steady but insistent. "Before everyone rushes to judgment, someone needs to look deeper." Thomas hesitated, glancing around the empty hallway. "I can't give you access to the files, Evelyn. You know that?" He paused, then added more quietly, "But the juvenile detention center allows visitors between 2 and 4, even for cases like this." Evelyn nodded her thanks and turned to leave. "Evelyn," Thomas called after her, "whatever you're thinking, be careful. Richard Hayes has his eye on the mayor's office. He won't appreciate anyone muddying what he sees as a clear-cut case." Outside, Evelyn checked her watch. It was just past 10 in the morning. She had 4 hours before visiting hours at the juvenile center. 4 hours to prepare to meet a boy the whole town had already decided was a monster. But Evelyn Thornton had spent a lifetime seeing past labels to the truth hiding underneath, and she wasn't about to stop now. The Riverbrook Juvenile Detention Center stood on the outskirts of town, a squat brick building with narrow windows and a chain-link fence surrounding it. Evelyn had visited this place countless times during her career, but today felt different as she signed her name in the visitor's log. "I'm here to see Elijah Monroe," she told the guard, keeping her voice steady. The guard raised his eyebrows. "The Monroe kid? You family?" "No," Evelyn replied. "I'm a former social worker. I'd like to speak with him." "Hold on," the guard said, picking up his phone. After a brief conversation, he nodded. 10 minutes. That's all you get." Evelyn was led down a sterile hallway to a small room with a table and 2 chairs. Minutes later, the door opened again, and a small boy entered, accompanied by another guard. Elijah Monroe was tiny for his age, with dark circles under his eyes and a mop of brown hair that needed cutting. He wore an oversized gray sweatshirt that made him look even smaller. "Hello, Elijah," Evelyn said gently. "My name is Mrs. Thornton. I'd like to talk with you for a few minutes, if that's all right." Elijah slid into the chair across from her, his eyes fixed on the table. He didn't speak. "I used to help children like you," Evelyn continued. "Children who are going through difficult times." Still nothing. The guard by the door shifted. Impatiently, Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad and some colored pencils she'd brought. "Sometimes it's easier to draw than to talk," she said, pushing them across the table. Elijah glanced up briefly, then took a red pencil and began making small circular marks on the paper. "Can you tell me anything about what happened with your mother?" Evelyn asked softly. The boy's hand stilled. Then, in a voice so quiet Evelyn had to lean forward to hear, he whispered, "I just wanted her to wake up." Evelyn's heart tightened. "Was your mother sleeping?" Elijah shook his head. "Not sleeping. She was having one of her bad days. She wouldn't eat. I tried to help her." His voice cracked. "I just wanted to fix her." "Fix her?" Evelyn repeated carefully. But Elijah had retreated back into silence, focusing intently on his drawing. Evelyn watched as he sketched what appeared to be a woman lying down with a small figure, presumably himself, standing beside her. "Is that your mom?" Evelyn asked. Elijah nodded. "Was she sick often?" Another nod. "Time's up," the guard interrupted from the doorway. "Just one more minute," Evelyn pleaded, but the guard was already approaching to escort Elijah out. As he stood to leave, Elijah suddenly looked directly at Evelyn. "Will she wake up now?" he asked, his eyes wide and desperate. "Did I fix her?" Before Evelyn could respond, he was led away, leaving his drawing on the table. She carefully folded it and placed it in her purse. Outside the detention center, Evelyn sat in her car, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. What she'd seen wasn't a dangerous child, but a confused, frightened boy who'd been trying to help his mother. The question was, help her with what? Her next stop was clear. She needed to speak with someone at the hospital where Sarah Monroe had been taken. Mercy General Hospital was a 20-minute drive from the juvenile center. In the hospital parking lot, Evelyn spotted a familiar figure, James Parker, her old friend, and a retired attorney who had often worked with her on difficult cases. "James," she called, waving him over. "Evelyn Thornton," he said, smiling warmly. "What brings you here? Nothing serious, I hope." "It's about the Monroe case," she replied. "I've just come from seeing the boy." James's smile faded. "Nasty business. The whole town's talking about That's just it, James. I don't think it's what everyone assumes. That boy isn't a monster. He's a child who was trying to help his mother." James studied her face. "You've got that look, Evelyn. The one you always got when you found a case that needed fighting for. Will you help me? For old time's sake," he sighed, rubbing his graying beard. "I've been enjoying my retirement, you know, fishing, reading those mystery novels I never had time for. Please, James. An 8-year-old boy's future is at stake." "All right," he conceded. "But let's be clear, we're just asking questions for now." Together, they entered the hospital, where James's status as a former attorney still carried weight. But as they approached the nurse's station to inquire about Sarah Monroe, they were intercepted by a stern-faced man in an expensive suit. Richard Hayes, the district attorney. "Well, well," Hayes said, looking between them. "I didn't expect to find you two poking around this case. Retirement must be boring you both." "We're concerned citizens, Richard," Evelyn replied calmly. "The time for social work is past, Mrs. Thornton. This is a criminal matter now." Hayes stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Stay away from this case for your own good." As Hayes walked away, James turned to Evelyn with raised eyebrows. "Looks like we've touched a nerve. What exactly are you getting us into?" Evelyn watched Hayes's retreating back, her resolve hardening. "The truth, James, we're going to find out." "The truth. Hayes doesn't scare me," Evelyn said as they left the hospital. "Never did, even when he was just a young hotshot fresh out of law school." James chuckled. "You never were one to back down from a fight. But we need information if we're going to help that boy." They settled at a bench in the hospital's small garden. Fall had painted the trees in rich golds and reds, reminding Evelyn of the drawing Elijah had made, the same red circles, round and round. "We should start with his teacher," Evelyn suggested. "Children often show signs of home troubles at school first." James nodded. "Riverbrook Elementary, then. Nancy Wilson still teaches there, doesn't she? 2nd grade? 3rd grade now," Evelyn corrected. "I ran into her at the grocery store last month." The elementary school was quiet when they arrived, the children having gone home for the day. They found Nancy in her classroom, arranging colorful artwork on a bulletin board. "Evelyn, James!" Nancy exclaimed, her face lighting up. "What brings you two here? Don't tell me you've decided to volunteer for reading time?" "We're here about Elijah Monroe," Evelyn said gently. Nancy's smile faded. She glanced toward the open door, then closed it quietly. "I've been so worried about him," she whispered. "Everyone's saying such terrible things, but he's just a little boy, a quiet, sweet little boy." "What can you tell us about him?" James asked. "Any signs of trouble?" Nancy shook her head emphatically. "Absolutely not. The opposite, really. Elijah was careful, always watching out for others." She moved to her desk and opened a drawer. "He missed a lot of school, though. When I called home, his mother would say he was sick. But when he returned, he would tell me he had to take care of Mommy." She pulled out a folder. "These are some of his drawings. I was concerned enough that I started keeping them." Evelyn opened the folder. The pictures inside showed the same scene repeatedly. A woman lying down, sometimes with strange circular patterns around her, and a small figure standing nearby. "He drew these almost every day during free time," Nancy explained. "When I asked him about them, he said his mom needed him because she got mixed up sometimes." "Mixed up?" James repeated. "That's all he would say. But look at this one." Nancy pointed to a drawing where the woman figure had squiggly lines coming from her head. "He told me that sometimes his mom saw things that weren't there, and he had to tell her what was real and what wasn't." Evelyn felt a chill. "Did you report this?" Nancy's face fell. "I tried. I called the Family Services Department twice. They said they'd check it out, but then nothing changed. Elijah kept missing school, kept drawing the same pictures." Her voice cracked. "I should have done more." "This isn't your fault," Evelyn assured her. "The system doesn't always work the way it should. I know that better than most." As they thanked Nancy and prepared to leave, she added, "There's something else. The day before what happened, Elijah asked me a strange question. He wanted to know if doctors could fix people who were broken inside. I thought he meant emotionally, so I told him that doctors can help people who feel sad or confused. He seemed so relieved." Tears welled in her eyes. "I keep thinking, what if he misunderstood me?" Outside the school, Evelyn and James sat in silence for a moment. "Sarah might have been having mental health episodes," Evelyn said finally, "if she wasn't getting treatment. And Elijah was trying to be her caretaker," James finished. "An 8-year-old boy shouldn't bear that kind of responsibility. We need to see those social service records," Evelyn decided. "If Nancy made reports, they should be on file." "Breaking into confidential records?" James raised an eyebrow. "That's a bit beyond asking. Questions, Evelyn. Not breaking in, she corrected. I still have friends in the department. Martha Bennett has been there almost as long as I was. She might help us. As they drove toward the county building, they passed the town square where a small crowd had gathered. A man was speaking loudly. From the gazebo steps, Pastor Benjamin Wright, his face flushed with emotion. The evil that has touched our community demands justice, he proclaimed to nods of agreement. We cannot allow such darkness to go unpunished. Evelyn felt her blood pressure rise. They're talking about an 8-year-old. Child like he's some kind of criminal mastermind, she muttered. James squeezed her shoulder. All the more reason to find out what really happened. At the Family Services Department, Martha Bennett was preparing to leave for the day when they arrived. Her face brightened at the sight of Evelyn, then grew serious as she listened to their request. You know I can't just hand over confidential files, she said, looking troubled. Martha, please, Evelyn implored. Something isn't right about this case. A little boy's future is at stake. Martha hesitated, then whispered, check the archived. Files from 1986. Sarah Monroe's own childhood case might shed some light. She glanced nervously down the hallway. That's all I can tell you. I'm sorry. As Martha hurried away, James looked at Evelyn with raised eyebrows. 1986? We're going further back than I expected. 3 generations. Evelyn murmured. Whatever happened to Elijah and Sarah didn't start with them. As they left the building, Evelyn spotted a familiar car in the parking lot. Richard Hayes was inside, watching them. He made no attempt to hide his surveillance, instead raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. He's trying to intimidate us, James observed. Evelyn straightened her shoulders. Then he doesn't know me very well. The following morning, Evelyn woke before dawn. Sleep had been elusive, her mind filled with images of Elijah's drawings and his plaintive question, did I fix her? She made herself a cup of tea and sat by her kitchen window, watching as the first hints of light painted the sky. On her refrigerator, held by a magnet, was a photo of herself from 30 years ago, surrounded by a group of children at a community picnic. She had helped all of them in various ways, found them safe, homes connected their families with resources, been the steady presence some of them desperately needed. Had Sarah Monroe slipped through her fingers somehow? The ringing phone startled her from her thoughts. Evelyn, it's James. I couldn't sleep, so I made some calls. An old colleague of mine. Works at the courthouse archives. She's willing to let us in early before official hours. By 7:30, they were at the courthouse. Alice, James's former colleague, met them at a side entrance. The records you want are in the basement, she explained, leading them down a narrow staircase. Everything from before 2000 is still in paper files. The basement archive smelled of dust and old paper. Row upon row of metal shelving stretched into the shadows, each shelf packed with boxes and folders. Family services cases from the 1980s would be in Section E, Alice said, pointing. I need to get back upstairs before anyone notices. Lock up when you leave. The door automatically locks behind you. After she left, Evelyn and James made their way to Section E. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as they searched through the neatly labeled boxes. Here, James said finally, 1986 M.I.D. Through P. They carried the heavy box to a small table in the corner. Inside were dozens of manila folders, each bearing a family name. James flipped through them until he found one labeled Monroe, H and S. Harold and Sarah, Evelyn murmured, opening the folder. Inside were yellowing papers, filled with neat handwriting. The first was an intake form dated March 1986. According to the report, 12-year-old Sarah Monroe had been found alone at home by a neighbor. The neighbor reported that the child had been on her own for at least 3 days, while her father, Harold Monroe, was away for work. Listen to this, Evelyn said, reading from a social worker's notes. Child appears undernourished and anxious. Home is in disarray. When asked about her mother, S became agitated and said, Mommy had to go away because her brain was sick. James leaned closer. No mention of where the mother went. Evelyn continued reading. Recommendation, temporary placement in foster care pending investigation into father's ability to provide adequate supervision. She turned to the next page, expecting to find details of Sarah's foster placement. Instead, there was a brief note. Case resolved. Child returned to father's custody. Monitoring plan implemented. The note was signed by Margaret Wilson, who had been the director of family services at the time. That's it? James asked, frowning. A child left alone for days, and the case is resolved just like that. Margaret always did prefer quick solutions, Evelyn said bitterly. She cared more about closing cases than solving problems. They continued reading. The monitoring plan consisted of monthly visits scheduled for the next 6 months. The first visit noted, home in better condition. Father has adjusted work. Schedule. Child appears adequately cared for. But the second monthly report was just a brief note. Visit attempted. No one home. The third was similar. By the 4th month, the visits had stopped altogether with a final note. Case closed due to family relocation. They just stopped. Following up, James said, disbelief in his voice. It happened too often, Evelyn replied, her voice tight with old frustration. Families would move to avoid supervision, and with district boundaries and limited resources, cases would fall through the cracks. As they continued searching through the file, a small newspaper clipping fell out. The headline read, Local woman committed to state hospital. The brief article stated that Eleanor Monroe had been admitted to Westlake Psychiatric Facility following an unspecified incident. Eleanor must be Sarah's mother, James said. The timeline fits. Evelyn nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. Mental illness can have a genetic component. If Sarah inherited her mother's condition, and if she wasn't getting treatment, James added, then Elijah was dealing with something no child should have to face alone. Evelyn finished. Their somber reflection was interrupted by the sound of the archive door opening. Footsteps approached, and they looked up to see Sheriff William Cooper standing before them, arms crossed. Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Parker. Interesting place for a morning meetup. Official research, James replied. Smoothly. Alice gave us permission. Sheriff Cooper nodded slowly. I'm sure she did, but I got a call from D.A. Hayes saying you two might be interfering with an active investigation. We're not interfering with anything, Evelyn protested. We're simply trying to understand the background of a troubled family. The background doesn't matter much now, Cooper said. The boys already confessed. Evelyn felt her heart sink. What? When? Last night. Said he was trying to fix his mother when she wouldn't wake up. Used a kitchen knife to get the badness out. Cooper's expression was unreadable. Hayes is filing formal charges this afternoon. As the sheriff turned to leave, he paused. For what it's worth, I don't like seeing a kid that young in the system either, but the law's the law. After he left, Evelyn sat heavily in her chair. They've twisted his words, she said. He wasn't confessing. He was trying to explain. James gathered the papers carefully back into the folder. We need to move quickly. Once Hayes files those charges, everything gets more complicated. We need to find Harold Monroe, Evelyn decided. Sarah's father, he might be the key to understanding what really happened in that house. As they left the archives, the morning sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. But for Elijah Monroe, Evelyn feared, the shadows were only growing darker. Finding Harold Monroe proved more difficult than Evelyn anticipated. He wasn't listed in the local phone directory, and the address from the old file was now occupied by a young family who had never heard of the Monroes. We need to think like investigators, James said as they sat in his car outside the courthouse. If Harold still lives around here, someone must know. Him. The hardware store, Evelyn suggested suddenly. The file mentioned he worked construction. Ed's Hardware has been here forever. Ed might remember him. Ed's Hardware was a Riverbrook institution, a creaky-floored establishment that had served the town for over 50 years. Ed himself, now in his 70s, sat on a stool behind the counter, reading a newspaper. Well, look who's here, he said, peering over his glasses. Evelyn Thornton and James Parker. What can I do for the town's retired guardian angels? We're looking for information on Harold Monroe, Evelyn said. He would have been a construction worker here back in the 80s. Ed scratched his chin thoughtfully. Monroe, yeah, I remember him. Quiet fella, good with his hands. Bought supplies here regular for years, then just stopped coming in. Must have been a decade ago at least. Any idea where he might be now? James asked. Last I heard, he was living out by Miller's Creek. Got himself a trailer out there after his daughter moved away. Ed leaned forward. This about what happened with his grandson? Terrible thing. We're trying to help, Evelyn said simply. Ed nodded. Miller's Creek Road, past the Johnson Farm. Look for a rusted mailbox with no name. Harold never was one for visitors. As they drove along the winding country road, Evelyn stared out at the passing farmland. Autumn had transformed the landscape into a patchwork of oranges and browns. They passed the Johnson farm, abandoned, years ago, and continued down the increasingly narrow road. There, James said, pointing to a mailbox leaning precariously by the roadside. They turned onto a dirt driveway that led to a small trailer nestled among overgrown trees. The property had a neglected feel, an old truck with missing wheels. Sat in tall grass, and the trailer itself needed fresh paint. As they pulled up, the trailer door opened. A man with a weathered face and gray hair stepped onto the small porch, a shotgun held loosely at his side. "Private property," he called. "Turn around." Evelyn opened her car door slowly and stepped out, hands visible. "Mr. Monroe, I'm Evelyn Thornton. I was a social worker in Riverbrook for many years. We'd like to talk to you about your daughter Sarah and your grandson Elijah." At the mention of those names, Harold's expression changed from suspicion to deep weariness. He lowered the shotgun. "Nobody's mentioned my grandson to me," he said, his voice rough. "Had to read about it in the paper, my own flesh and blood." "May we come in?" Evelyn asked gently. "We're trying to help him." Harold studied them for a long moment, then nodded once. "You'd better come inside." "But I don't. Know what good talking will do now. Some things just run in the blood." As he turned to enter the trailer, Evelyn and James exchanged a look. Whatever secrets Harold Monroe carried, they were about to uncover them, for Elijah's sake. The inside of Harold's trailer was surprisingly neat, if cramped. Fishing gear hung on one wall, and a small table held a half-completed model ship. He gestured for them to sit at the tiny kitchen table while he lowered himself into an armchair, the shotgun now propped in a corner. "So you're here about Sarah and the boy," Harold said. "What's there to say?" "History repeating itself, that's all." "What do you mean by that, Mr. Monroe?" James asked. Harold ran a hand through his thinning hair. "You found the old records, didn't you? That's why you're here." He reached for a tin on a nearby shelf and pulled out an old photograph, sliding it across the table to them. The photo showed a younger Harold with his arm around a pretty woman. Between them stood a small girl, Sarah, smiling shyly at the camera. "Eleanor, my wife," Harold said, tapping the woman's image. "She was fine when we got married. Then after Sarah was born, things changed. Started seeing things that weren't there, talking to people who didn't exist." "Schizophrenia?" Evelyn suggested softly. Harold shrugged. "They called it lots of things back then. All I know is, one day she was my Ellie. The next she was someone I didn't recognize. The newspaper mentioned she was committed to Westlake," James said. Harold's face hardened. "Had no choice, she—" He stopped, glancing at the photograph. "She wasn't safe to be around Sarah anymore. I worked construction, gone most days. Couldn't watch them both." "What happened after that?" Evelyn asked. "Ellie never came home. Died in that place 2 years later. Pneumonia, they said." His voice wavered slightly. "Sarah was just a kid. Didn't understand why her mama was gone." "And when Sarah grew up," Evelyn prompted, "started showing the same signs in her 20s. I tried to get her help, but she wouldn't hear of it. Said she wasn't crazy, wasn't going to end up like her mother." Harold's eyes grew distant. "Then she got pregnant. Father was long gone before the baby came. I offered to help, but Sarah pushed me away. Said she could manage on her own." "When did you last see her?" James asked. 4 years ago. Stopped by with the boy, Elijah. He was little, maybe 4. Sarah seemed okay that day, taking her medication, but I could see it in her eyes sometimes. That faraway look, just like Ellie used to get." Harold sighed heavily. After that visit, she stopped answering my calls, changed her number. I tried to check on them a few times, but she'd never open the door. Mr. Monroe, Evelyn said carefully, do you think Sarah might have been having episodes recently? Times when she wasn't herself? Harold looked up sharply. You think that's what happened? Sarah had an episode, and the boy, he couldn't finish the sentence. We believe Elijah was trying to help his mother, James explained. But without understanding what was really happening, Harold stood suddenly, moving to a drawer in the kitchen. He pulled out a stack of envelopes, held together with a rubber band. Birthday. Cards, he explained. Every year for the boy. Never sent them. Didn't know if they'd moved, if Sarah would even give them to him. His hand trembled slightly. All this time I should have tried harder. Shouldn't have let her push me away. The regret in his voice was palpable. Evelyn reached out and gently touched his arm. It's not too late to help your grandson, she said. Would you be willing to tell the authorities what you've told us? About Sarah's condition? About the family history? Harold squared his shoulders. I'll do whatever it takes. That boy's all the family I've got left. As they prepared to leave, Harold stopped Evelyn at the door. Those records you found, was Margaret Wilson involved? She was the one who sent Sarah back to me even though I told her I couldn't watch her properly with my work schedule. Said the system was overloaded, and blood family was always best. Evelyn nodded grimly. Margaret had a habit of closing cases prematurely, but we won't let history repeat itself with Elijah, not this time. The next morning, Evelyn, James, and Harold Monroe sat in the visitors area of Mercy General Hospital. After their conversation at the trailer, they had convinced Harold to come with them to see his daughter. Now, dressed in his best flannel shirt with his gray hair neatly combed, he fidgeted nervously as they waited for permission to visit Sarah. I haven't seen her in so long, he murmured. What do I even say? Just be there for her, Evelyn advised gently. That's what matters now. A nurse approached them. Ms. Monroe is stable but heavily sedated, she explained. She may not be very responsive. 10 minutes, no more. As Harold followed the nurse, Evelyn turned to James. We need to find out more about Sarah's medical history. There should be records of her condition, prescriptions, previous hospitalizations, patient privacy laws, James reminded her. We can't just ask for those records. No, but... Evelyn paused as she spotted a familiar face at the nurse's station, Grace Sullivan, a nurse she'd known for years. Approaching Grace with a warm smile, Evelyn kept her voice low. Grace, I need your help. This isn't just about curiosity. A little boy's future depends on understanding his mother's condition. Grace glanced around, then pulled Evelyn aside. I can tell you what I know, but it doesn't leave this conversation. She looked down at her clipboard. Sarah Monroe has been admitted twice before in the past 3 years, both times for paranoid episodes. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, like her mother. Was she on medication? Evelyn asked. She was prescribed antipsychotics, but... Grace hesitated. But what? Her insurance lapsed 6 months ago when she lost her job. Her prescription refills stopped around the same time. Grace's expression softened with compassion. When they brought her in this time, she was severely dehydrated and malnourished. She'd likely been in a deteriorating state for weeks. Evelyn's heart sank. And Elijah was trying to take care of her all that time. Grace nodded sadly. The poor child. From what the paramedics reported, the house was in chaos. Empty food containers everywhere, notes taped to walls with strange writings. Sarah had apparently stopped recognizing reality from delusion. Thank you, Grace, Evelyn said, squeezing her hand. This helps us understand what Elijah was dealing with. When Harold returned from Sarah's room, his face was ashen. She didn't know me, he said, his voice breaking. Called me by her uncle's name. Kept asking where Elijah was, if he was safe. She's concerned for him even now, James observed. That's something. We need to use this information, Evelyn said decisively. Harold, would you be willing to speak with Elijah's teacher? Your testimony about the family's medical history could be crucial. Harold nodded. Whatever it takes. They drove to Riverbrook Elementary, where Nancy Wilson was preparing for the next day's classes. Her eyes widened when Harold introduced himself. "Mr. Monroe, I'm so glad to meet you," she said, shaking his hand warmly. "Elijah mentioned a grandfather, but I didn't know how to reach you." "He talked about me?" Harold asked, surprised. Nancy nodded. "He once drew a picture of a man teaching him to fish. He said it was his grandpa, but he couldn't remember where you lived." Harold's eyes glistened. "I only took him fishing. Once when he was 4. As they shared what they had learned about Sarah's condition, Nancy retrieved her file of Elijah's drawings. "Look at this progression," she said, laying them out in order. The earliest drawings showed Sarah standing, smiling. Then she was sitting, looking tired. The latest ones showed her lying down, with strange circular patterns around her head that looked almost like the halos in religious paintings. He was documenting her decline, Evelyn realized, in the only way he knew how. "The way children process trauma is through their art," Nancy agreed. He was crying for help, but no one recognized the signs. As they gathered the drawings to take with them, the school principal appeared in the doorway, his expression severe. "Nancy, a word?" he said, gesturing to the hallway. When Nancy returned moments later, her face was flushed. "That was District Attorney Hayes on the phone. He's warned the school not to get involved in Elijah's case." She took a deep breath. "But I'm already involved. That boy needs someone to stand up for him, and I'm not backing down." Evelyn smiled at the younger woman's determination. "None of us are. Now, it's time we spoke. Directly to the person handling Elijah's case." The Riverbrook County Courthouse stood in the center of town, its weathered brick facade and white columns a testament to a more elegant era. Inside, the marble floors echoed with their footsteps as Evelyn, James, and Harold made their way to the district attorney's office. "Remember," James cautioned as they approached, "Hayes is ambitious. He sees this case as a stepping stone. We need to appeal to his sense of justice, not challenge him directly." Hayes's secretary eyed them suspiciously, but buzzed them in after James presented his former attorney credentials. The district attorney sat behind an imposing desk, his suit impeccable, his expression coldly professional. "Well, this is quite the delegation," Hayes remarked, not bothering to stand. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "We've come about Elijah Monroe," Evelyn said. Hayes's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, yes, your little crusade. Mrs. Thornton, while I respect your years of service, this is a criminal matter now. The boy has confessed." "A confused 8-year-old trying to explain something he doesn't understand is hardly a confession," James countered. Harold stepped forward, hat in hands. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Elijah's grandfather. There are things about our family you need to know." For the next 10 minutes, Harold explained the history of mental illness that had plagued his wife and daughter. He spoke of Sarah's deterioration, her refusal to seek consistent help, and the burden that had fallen on young Elijah's shoulders. Hayes listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Harold finished, the district attorney leaned back in his chair. "A tragic family history, Mr. Monroe. Truly. But it doesn't change what happened." "It changes everything," Evelyn insisted. "This wasn't a malicious act by a disturbed child. It was a desperate attempt by a little boy to help his mother the only way he knew how." "Public opinion wouldn't agree," Hayes said, tapping a pen against his desk. "The community is frightened. They want reassurance that justice will be served. Justice isn't served by punishing a child for circumstances beyond his control," James argued. Hayes's expression hardened. "The law doesn't make exceptions based on good intentions, Mr. Parker. You of all people should know that." Evelyn felt her patience wearing thin. "Richard, I've known you since you were a young attorney with ideals. Is this really the case you want to build your reputation on? Prosecuting an 8-year-old boy who was failed by the very system you represent?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Hayes's face, quickly masked. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A full psychological evaluation before any charges are formalized," James suggested, "and consideration of placement in a treatment facility rather than juvenile detention, and public acknowledgement of the systemic failures that led to this tragedy," Evelyn added. "Sarah Monroe's condition was documented. The system knew about her struggles and did nothing." Hayes stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll consider the evaluation." The rest is beyond my authority." As they turned to leave, Harold paused. "Mr. Hayes, my grandson is all I have left. Please, don't make him pay for our failures." Outside the courthouse, they stood in the autumn sunshine, uncertain whether they'd made any progress. "He's worried about his image," James observed. "If public opinion shifted, Hayes might reconsider his approach. Then we need to change the narrative," Evelyn decided. "People are afraid because they don't understand what happened. We need to help them see the truth." As they discussed their next steps, a young woman approached them, notebook in hand. "Excuse me, are you Evelyn Thornton? I'm Caroline Foster from the Riverbrook Gazette. I've heard you're looking into the Monroe case. Would you be willing to comment?" Evelyn exchanged glances with James and Harold. Here was their chance to shift the narrative, to tell Elijah's story to the community. But it would mean going public against a powerful district attorney, potentially facing backlash from a frightened town. "Yes," Evelyn said firmly. "We'd like to comment. It's time the truth came to light." As Caroline began taking notes, Evelyn noticed Sheriff Cooper watching them from across the street, his expression troubled. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, but gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Perhaps, Evelyn thought with renewed hope, they weren't as alone in this fight as they had believed. The headline of the Riverbrook Gazette read, "Monroe Case, a Tragedy of Neglect." Caroline Foster's article detailed the Monroe family's struggle with untreated mental illness, the system's repeated failures, and an 8-year-old boy caught in circumstances beyond his understanding. While carefully avoiding graphic details of the incident, the article painted a picture of Elijah not as a dangerous child, but as a young caretaker overwhelmed by adult responsibilities. By mid-morning, the article was the talk of the town. Evelyn's phone rang constantly with calls from former colleagues, neighbors, and even strangers touched by the story. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest," James said when he stopped by her house, newspaper in hand. "Good," Evelyn replied firmly. This town needed stirring. They had arranged to meet Harold at the Juvenile Detention Center for Elijah's scheduled visitation. When they arrived, they found an unexpected ally waiting for them, Sheriff Cooper. "Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Parker," he greeted them solemnly. "That was quite an article." "Are you here to stop us, Sheriff?" James asked cautiously. Cooper shook his head. "I'm here to help. After reading that piece, I took another look at my initial report from the Monroe house." He lowered his voice. "There were details I overlooked. Medicine bottles past due, notices from doctors, a calendar where the boy had marked his mother's good days and bad days." Evelyn studied him. "Why the change of heart, Sheriff?" "I've got grandchildren of my own," he said simply, "and I've seen how the system can fail people. Maybe it's time someone stood up and said, 'Enough.'" Inside the visitation room, Elijah sat waiting. He looked smaller than ever in his oversized clothes, but his face brightened slightly when he saw his grandfather. "Grandpa?" he said uncertainly. "You came?" Harold knelt beside Elijah's chair, his eyes damp. "I'm here now, son, and I'm not. And, going anywhere." While Harold and Elijah talked quietly, Rebecca Andrews, the center's counselor, approached Evelyn and James. "I've been working with Elijah daily," she explained. "He's been drawing constantly. It's his way of processing what happened." She handed them a folder. "These might help. You understand?" The newest drawings showed Sarah in bed, surrounded by what looked like dark clouds or shadows. In one picture, tiny figures that weren't human seemed to be around her. Another showed Elijah trying to catch these figures in a net. "He told me the bad things were hurting his mom. From the inside," Rebecca explained. "He thought if he could get them out, she would be better. Just like a doctor would remove something causing pain," Evelyn murmured, her heart breaking for the confused child. "Exactly. In his mind, he wasn't hurting her. He was trying to save her." When visitation ended, they found Caroline Foster waiting outside with news. The district attorney's office just announced they're postponing the formal charging decision pending a psychological evaluation, she told them excitedly. "And look at this." She showed them her phone displaying a local community forum where dozens of residents were commenting on her article. Many expressed sympathy for Elijah and outrage at the system's failures. Some shared their own struggles with mental health care access. Public opinion is shifting, Caroline said. People are asking questions about how this could happen in our town. As they left the detention center, they noticed a small group gathered across the street. Pastor Wright stood at the center, his expression thunderous as he spoke to his followers. "Don't be fooled by this manipulation of the truth," he was saying. "Evil must be confronted, not excused." "Not everyone will be convinced," James observed. "We don't need everyone," Evelyn replied. "Just enough good people to make a difference." That evening, as Evelyn prepared for bed, her doorbell rang. On her porch stood Thomas Reynolds, the current director of family services, looking uncomfortable. "Evelyn," he said hesitantly, "may I come in? There's something you should know about Sarah Monroe's case, something that never made it into the official records." Evelyn stepped aside, her heart racing. Whatever Thomas had come to reveal, she sensed it could change everything. Thomas Reynolds sat stiffly in Evelyn's living room, clutching a manila folder that had clearly seen better days. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly in the silence between them. "I've been with the department for 20 years, Thomas began. "Started just as Margaret Wilson was. Retiring. She left behind a legacy." The way he said the word made it sound more like a burden than an honor. "Margaret had her own way of handling difficult cases," Evelyn prompted gently. Thomas nodded. "She called them her special interventions, cases that never went through proper channels." He slid the folder across the coffee table. "I found this in a locked drawer when I became director. It's not in our official records." Evelyn opened the folder to find handwritten notes about Sarah Monroe, observations from home visits that had supposedly never happened. Margaret kept her own records? Evelyn asked, skimming the pages. For certain cases, yes, she would mark them officially resolved, but privately continue to monitor them, her way. Thomas looked down at his hands. "The last entry is from 1997, when Sarah was about 23. Margaret noted signs of potential mental distress similar to maternal pattern, but took no official action." Evelyn felt a chill. She recognized the symptoms of schizophrenia beginning to manifest in Sarah, just like her mother, and did nothing. "Worse," Thomas said, turning to the final page. "She advised Sarah to avoid psychiatric evaluation because, and I quote, official diagnosis would result in same outcome as mother, institutional commitment." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the gravity of this revelation. Margaret discouraged a vulnerable young woman from seeking the help she needed out of some misguided attempt to protect her from the system. "She thought she was being kind," Thomas said quietly. "Institutional care in Eleanor Monroe's day was less than humane." "But that was decades ago." Evelyn's voice rose with indignation. "Mental health treatment has evolved. Sarah could have received proper medication, therapy, support groups. Instead, she was left to struggle alone, and eventually, Elijah became collateral damage." Thomas looked genuinely remorseful. "I debated whether to bring this forward. It doesn't paint our department in a favorable light. It's not about the department's reputation, Thomas. It's about justice for a little boy who never should have been put in this position." Evelyn's voice softened. "Thank you for your courage. This could make all the difference." After Thomas left, Evelyn called James immediately. They agreed to meet first thing in the morning to discuss this new evidence. Unable to sleep, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, poring over Margaret's private notes. The entries painted a picture of a young Sarah, intelligent but increasingly isolated, showing early signs of the illness that would eventually consume her life. One particular entry caught her attention. S expressed concern about having children someday, fears passing on Mama's sickness. Reassured her that with proper support, many women with family history manage motherhood successfully. Proper support, exactly what Sarah had never received. By morning, Evelyn had formulated a plan. When James arrived, his expression told her he'd had a similar night of reflection. "We need to request an emergency hearing," he said without preamble. "These records prove systemic negligence spanning decades. And we need to speak with Dr. Chen, Sarah's Current psychiatrist, Evelyn added. If Sarah stabilizes enough to understand what's happened, her testimony could be crucial. You realize Hayes won't go down without a fight, James warned. This implicates not just Margaret Wilson, but the entire system that allowed these practices. I'm counting on it, Evelyn replied. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to expose its failures so completely that no one can look away. As they prepared to leave, Evelyn's phone rang. It was Rebecca Andrews from the detention center. Mrs. Thornton, she said, her voice urgent. You need to come quickly. Elijah had a nightmare last night and hasn't spoken a word since. He's withdrawn completely. The only thing he's done is draw this. She sent a photo to Evelyn's phone. It showed a crude drawing of Sarah in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors, with Elijah standing far away, separated by what looked like bars. He thinks he's lost his mother forever, Evelyn realized, and he blames himself. We need to move fast, James agreed, already heading for the door. Before that boy retreats somewhere, we can't reach him. At the juvenile detention center, they found Elijah, sitting cross-legged on his bed, methodically tearing a piece of paper into tiny strips. He didn't look up when they entered. Elijah, Evelyn said gently, we'd like to talk with you. No response. Rebecca Andrews stood beside them, concern etched on her face. He's been like this since dawn, she explained quietly. The night attendant reported he woke up screaming around 2 a.m. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd the boy. Elijah, I saw your drawing. The one with your mom in the hospital. Still nothing. You're worried about her, aren't you? A barely perceptible nod. Would it help to know how she's doing? Evelyn continued. Dr. Chen says she's getting better each day. The medicine is helping her. Elijah's hands stilled. Really? His voice was so soft they could barely hear it. Really, Evelyn confirmed. In fact, we're going to see her today. Would you like us to tell her something from you? Slowly, Elijah reached under his pillow and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Unlike his other drawings, this one showed Sarah and Elijah together in a park, both smiling, holding hands. The sun beamed down on them, unnaturally large and yellow. It's for her to remember our good days, he explained, his voice still faint. For when she forgets. I'll make sure she gets it, Evelyn promised, carefully taking the drawing. Elijah, there's something else we want to talk about. Mr. Parker here is going to help tell your side of the story to the judge. James knelt beside the bed. But to do that, I need to understand exactly what happened that day. Do you think you could tell us? Elijah's eyes darted nervously between them. Am I in trouble? No, son, James assured him. We're trying to help you. Elijah took a deep breath. Mom was having a really bad week. The voices were really loud, that's what she called them. She couldn't tell what was real anymore. Had this happened before? Evelyn asked. Elijah nodded. Usually she took her pills and got better, but we ran out and she said we couldn't afford more. His small hands twisted in the bed sheet. That morning she was crying, saying something was inside her, hurting her. She kept scratching herself, trying to get it out. I tried to help her drink water, but she knocked it away. He paused, his breath coming faster. Rebecca moved closer, her presence reassuring. It's okay, she said softly. Take your time. I remembered on the doctor show when people are sick inside. The doctors do an operation to take the bad things out. Elijah continued. Mom kept saying it hurt inside, that something bad was there. So his voice faltered. You tried to help like the doctors on TV. Evelyn finished for him. Elijah nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I didn't want to hurt her. I just wanted to make the bad things stop hurting her. But there was blood, and she stopped moving, and I got scared. The tears spilled over. Did I make her worse instead of better? The raw anguish in his question broke Evelyn's heart. She gently took his hand. No, Elijah, what happened wasn't your fault. Your mom was very, very sick, and you were trying to help the only way you knew how. You love her very much, don't you? More than anything, he whispered. She's my mom. As they left the detention center, James was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, he said, In 40 years of legal practice, I've never heard a more clear-cut case of diminished capacity. That boy had no understanding of the permanent consequences of his actions. Will that be enough? Evelyn asked. It should be. In a rational world, James replied. But we're dealing with Richard Hayes and public opinion. At Mercy General Hospital, they found Dr. Olivia Chen reviewing Sarah's charts outside her room. Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Parker, she greeted them. I was about to call you. Sarah has shown remarkable improvement with consistent medication. She's lucid today and asking about Elijah. Can we see her? Evelyn asked eagerly. Dr. Chen nodded. Briefly. She still tires easily, and too much stimulation can be overwhelming, but she hesitated. She remembers what happened now, at least parts of it. She's devastated. Inside the room, Sarah Monroe sat propped up against pillows, her thin face pale but alert. When she saw them, her eyes immediately fixed on the drawing in Evelyn's hand. Is that from Elijah? She asked, her voice hoarse but clear. Is he okay? As Evelyn handed her the drawing, she saw something she hadn't expected in Sarah's eyes. Not just confusion or sorrow, but a mother's fierce love. Sarah's hands trembled as she held her son's drawing. I remember that day, she whispered. We had a picnic in Henderson Park. It was spring. Everything was blooming. She traced the figures with her finger. It was a good day. I was present. Sarah, Evelyn said gently, we need your help to protect Elijah. Do you feel strong enough to tell us about what happened? Sarah's eyes clouded with pain. It's all fragmented. When I don't take my medication, reality slips. I remember feeling like something was inside me, something dark and hurting. I remember Elijah trying to help me eat, drink. Her voice broke. Such a little boy, carrying such a burden. It wasn't your fault, James assured her. The system failed both of you. Sarah looked up, suddenly fierce. I need to tell the truth, all of it, about what I remember, about how hard it was to get help, about how I was told to avoid doctors because they'd take me away like they took my mother. Dr. Chen, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. Sarah's testimony could be powerful, but her condition is still fragile. Any court appearance would need to be carefully managed. What if we recorded her statement? James suggested. Present it as evidence without requiring her to appear in person? As they discussed the possibilities, Harold arrived with unexpected news. The town's talking, he reported. Caroline's written another article about the department's failures. People are asking questions about other families who might have fallen through the cracks, and he smiled slightly. Pastor Wright's congregation is shrinking. Seems not everyone agrees with his views on evil. Children. For the first time since this began, Evelyn felt a flutter of genuine hope. Perhaps Riverbrook was finally ready to confront its own failings and to extend mercy to a confused little boy who had only wanted to help his mother. The courthouse was packed for Elijah's hearing. Judge Edward Thompson, a stern man with 40 years on the bench, presided over the proceedings with a face that revealed nothing of his thoughts. District Attorney Hayes had adjusted his approach in response to the shifting public sentiment, but remained committed to some form of institutional placement for Elijah. While we acknowledge the tragic circumstances, he argued, we cannot ignore the potential danger. This child, however well-intentioned, attempted to perform surgery on his mother based on television shows. He requires specialized supervision and treatment. James, officially appointed as Elijah's defense attorney, presented their evidence methodically. The drawings showing Sarah's deterioration, Margaret Wilson's hidden files documenting decades of systemic neglect, Dr. Chen's assessment of Sarah's condition, and statements from Elijah's teacher about his role as a caretaker. The most powerful moment came when they played Sarah's recorded testimony. Though still gaunt, she spoke with clarity about her struggles with schizophrenia, the financial barriers to consistent treatment, and her memory of that terrible day. I told him something bad was inside me, she said, tears streaming down her face. I begged him to help me get it out. He was doing exactly what I asked, what any loving child would do for their mother. Please don't punish my son for my illness. When the recording ended, The courtroom was silent except for muffled sobs. Judge Thompson cleared his throat. "I'd like to speak with the child privately in my chambers." As Elijah was led away, Evelyn squeezed Harold's hand. "It's a good sign," she whispered. "Thompson wants to see Elijah as a person, not just a case." While they waited, Sheriff Cooper approached them. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "I want you to know I've started implementing changes in how we handle cases involving children. No more rushing to judgment." When Judge Thompson finally returned with Elijah, his usually impassive face had softened. "I've reached my decision," he announced. "But first, I believe someone has something to say." To everyone's surprise, Richard Hayes stood. "Your Honor, in light of all evidence presented, the state wishes to withdraw its petition for formal charges against Elijah Monroe. We request instead that the court consider a supervised treatment plan focusing on his well-being and rehabilitation." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Hayes had conceded. Judge Thompson nodded. "So ordered. Additionally, this court will establish an independent review of all similar cases handled by Family Services under Margaret Wilson's leadership." He looked directly at Elijah. "Young man, you're going to get the help you need, and you'll be seeing your mother and grandfather very soon." For the first time since they'd met him, Elijah smiled. A small, hesitant thing, but unmistakably real. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Riverbrook, covering the town in a blanket of snow that softened its edges and muffled its sounds. Sarah continued her recovery at Westlake, now a modern facility nothing like the institution that had claimed her mother's life. With proper medication and therapy, her condition stabilized. Dr. Chen was cautiously optimistic about her eventual return to independent living, with support. Elijah lived with his grandfather in a small house they'd rented at the edge of town. The trailer had been deemed too isolated for a child's needs, so Harold had reluctantly moved closer to civilization. Every Saturday they visited Sarah together, and every week her recognition of them grew stronger, her smiles more frequent. Twice weekly, Elijah attended therapy sessions with Rebecca Andrews, who had left the detention center to open a private practice focusing on children from troubled homes. His drawings gradually changed. Less darkness, more color, though a certain watchfulness remained in how he depicted himself and others. Evelyn visited them often, bringing cookies and books. One snowy afternoon, as she was leaving, Elijah stopped her at the door. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, presenting her with a carefully folded piece of paper. "I made this for you." It was a drawing of 5 figures standing together: Elijah, Sarah, Harold, James, and Evelyn herself, all holding hands under a bright sun. "It's my new family," he explained solemnly. "The people who helped when nobody else would." Evelyn blinked back tears. "It's beautiful, Elijah. Thank you." As she drove home through the gentle snowfall, she reflected on how much had changed. The Family Services Department was under new leadership after Thomas Reynolds stepped down, acknowledging his failure to address Margaret Wilson's problematic legacy. A community task force had been established to identify and support at-risk families, with particular attention to mental health needs. Even Richard Hayes had changed, chastened by public reaction to his initial handling of Elijah's case. His campaign materials now emphasized rehabilitation over punishment, second chances over harsh penalties, James called that evening. "The Review Commission has identified 27 cases similar to Sarah's," he reported. "Families who were documented but never properly served. We're reaching out to each of them." "Better late than never," Evelyn replied. "Though for some, I fear it's too late." "Perhaps," James agreed. "But for others like Elijah, it might just make all the difference." Spring came to Riverbrook, bringing with it renewal and change. The town park bloomed with daffodils and tulips, and on a perfect April afternoon, Evelyn sat on a bench watching Elijah fly a kite with his grandfather. The boy had grown inches in the past 6 months. His face had filled out, and he laughed more easily now. He still had moments of anxiety, especially when Sarah had difficult days, but he was learning that he didn't have to carry adult burdens on his small shoulders. Sarah, seated beside Evelyn, followed her son with eyes clear from medication and ongoing therapy. She would never be completely free of her condition, but she had learned to manage it, to recognize early warning signs of episodes, and to ask for help when needed. I never thought we'd have days like this. Again, Sarah said softly. Normal days. Your new normal, Evelyn agreed, built on truth and proper support. They watched as Harold showed Elijah how to maneuver the kite higher, their faces tilted toward the sky in shared concentration. You know, Sarah said, during my worst times I believed. Terrible things were happening to me, but the truly terrible thing was being abandoned by a system that should have protected us. She turned to Evelyn. How many other families are out there, struggling alone like we did? Too many, Evelyn admitted. But Riverbrook is changing. Your story opened. Many eyes, including mine. I thought retirement meant I was done fighting these battles. Sarah smiled. And now? Now I realize some callings never truly end. Evelyn patted Sarah's hand. The new director has asked me to train the incoming social workers, to share what 40 years of experience and recent lessons have taught me. Across the park, Elijah had managed to get his kite soaring high above the trees. His triumphant laugh carried to them on the spring breeze. He's going to be okay, isn't he? Sarah asked, the eternal question of every mother who has seen her child suffer. Evelyn looked at the boy, once lost in a system that hadn't protected him, now finding his way back to childhood with proper support and love. Yes, she said with certainty. He's going to be okay. You both are. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The failures and neglect that had allowed tragedy to unfold had been generations in the making, but healing, too, could span generations. In a small town like Riverbrook, where everyone claimed to know everyone else's business, a little boy had nearly been lost because nobody had truly been paying attention. But when people finally looked, really looked, they found not a monster, but a child desperate to save his mother, carrying a burden no child should bear. There are no monsters born into this world, Evelyn thought, watching Elijah run with his kite string, clutched tightly in his small hands. Only children who need someone to see them, hear them, and stand beside them when the shadows grow too deep. The kite soared higher, catching a current of warm air, rising toward the endless blue sky.